Good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us today as we delve into the complex world of healthcare cybersecurity. I'm Sean Costigan, Managing Director of Resilient Strategy at Redshift, and I'm here with my great colleague, Billy McDermott, as we discuss the latest insights and threats, regulatory, and advancements in safeguarding our healthcare systems. So we're going to go through quite a bit today, and it's our pleasure to delve into our research and just give you a feeling for where we think things are headed and some of the things that we can do. So recent cybersecurity incidents in the healthcare industry have highlighted vulnerabilities that we face, from social engineering to domain name takeovers. And these incidents underscore the urgent need for robust cybersecurity protocols. We'll discuss some of those in greater detail. So when we look at the healthcare landscape, particularly with regard to what we see in the breaches over the last couple of years and some of the estimates that have been given by national security agencies and by others who are involved in this space, there are general assessments that we're going to see a tripling of risks in this space. So geopolitical threats, as is noted here, cybercrime continues to increase in various ways, as do the challenges of having to deal with legacy tech debt. So that kind of surge continues as there's digital transformation in this space as well. And then, as Billy and I will discuss as we come to some greater detail, we'll look at some of the regulatory and legal pressures that intensify in this space, and we'll put greater pressure on the entities that are involved. So, Billy, do you want to introduce yourself quickly? I didn't bounce it over to you yet, but I should have done that. So, please do before I get into phishing. And over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, just when one of my favourite topics comes up, phishing and the risks of that. Not actual phishing, I'm that old joke. It's I'm not very good at that, but phishing continues to be an ongoing threat. Thank you, Sean. I'm Billy McDermott. I'm the VP of Sales Engineering here at Redshift. I've worked for a number of years in this space, and it's really interesting. That phishing remains a top threat, Sean, despite the fact that there have been a number of existing protocols that have been available for a number of years and that are in use. And we'll talk more about that as we go through, look at not only the types of attacks that we are seeing on a frequent basis against the sector and other organisations that we work with, but also the adoption of protections and what the protections actually are.
Brilliant. Yep. Well, I figured we'd want to talk about phishing and not real phishing, but we'll get to that maybe another call, another YouTube channel. So, all right. So
we're going to go through a terrible TV show, Sean. You and I on phishing bots.
It does, but funny nonetheless. So, phishing remains a top threat, and we're gonna discuss that in some detail. It's it shouldn't surprise us, those who are on this call who are expert in this field, that it remains a really significant problem for us. So, when we look at the next slide, and we'll, if you would, Billy, I'll just get into that. We'll look at a snapshot of a bad month. But when we, this is some of the data that we analyzed that you'll see in greater detail as we go along. But the point of this is to use a DMARC, our analysis of the DMARC protocol that entities may have been using properly or improperly, to give a sense of their maturity, ultimately, to see cybersecurity maturity is challenged and uneven in the healthcare space. And when we look at the adoption of DMARC, that gives us a very good indicator, ultimately, of where they are in their path. And when we look at phishing, so briefly, let me just give you some indicators of where we are here. Over 90% of successful cyber attacks, including ransomware attacks, originate from phishing emails. We know that in 2024, ransomware affected some 92% of industries. That's particularly Verizon data, and with the average ransomware payout of 1.5 million. Then we see a recent sectoral alert from the Department of Health and Human Services that states that business email compromise has emerged as one of the most effective and damaging attacks from cyber criminals against the healthcare industry. So taken together, when we put those pieces together, the back end ransomware that regularly comprise around 60 to 70% of total cyber incidents over the last year. And that shouldn't surprise us, but it remains very startling. As a part of a layered defense, and we'll get into that in some detail here, we're going to talk about DMARC, and that reduces the chances of BEC very considerably, and other problems that are delivered via email by blocking spoofed emails while giving organizations greater visibility into email-based threats. So,
and just one
Billy,
point to
anything on
make
this
on
slide? Yeah, go ahead.
DMARC
Yeah.
there, actually, just before we move on as well, for those that are perhaps, they know the term and they're not 100% familiar with what it does. DMARC and the protocols that encompasses SPF and DKIM are the protections in place that effectively tell the internet who can send email on behalf of your organization and on behalf of your domain. But importantly as well, Sean, it tells the internet what to do if one of the rules in place means that it's telling the internet, oh no, somebody shouldn't be sending out that email. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, because of the way that DNS works, you cannot, as an organization, you can't control who tries to send the email as your domain, but you can tell the internet to reject it if someone does try, and that's the purpose, and that's where DMARC really fits into that equation. It fits into
That's right.
this difference between unprotected and at enforcement. If you're at enforcement, you're telling the internet, reject those emails if they don't match the rules that I've put in place. Without it, you are going to have a chance that the email will be delivered into someone's inbox.
Right, and Billy, let's hold on this slide for a second because we use a term here, pretexting, very briefly, and I think we'll get into some greater detail on the different types of phishing and social engineering attacks. But pretexting isn't texting someone before, right? There are going to be people before the attack takes place. It's it's kind of an easy mistake that people can make, but it's really the use of a fabricated story or pretext, right, to make it clear to gain victims' trust. And so we're going to try and be as specific as possible as we go through this presentation. And if we go back one briefly and look at that snapshot of a bad month, let me just make note that what we're looking at here is HHS data. So this is Health and Human Services data from the United States. And I think it'll carry on throughout the discussion as we look at some of this data. We'll see that there is greater maturity in the adoption of DMARC in certain entities and in certain sectors than there is in other sectors. But this month in particular was bad, but also gives us, if you see those two indicators there, we got our green 70% unprotected and ad enforcement 30%. Kind of should have flipped those colors, but it gives us an indication of where we are briefly. So let's move ahead, if you would, Billy. Okay, we've knocked out some of that. And go to the next slide. All right, so miscellaneous errors. For those of you who are familiar with the Verizon Data Breach Investigations Report, if you're not, you should be. It's a fantastic report. Miscellaneous errors is one of these categories, and I want to get into this in a little detail here that gives us a bit of a challenge when we think about what are the sorts of mistakes that are being made, what are the entry points for cyber attacks. But in this instance, in the Verizon Data Breach Report, what we're really talking about is human in origin errors that may be more commonly thought of as mistakes, just simply, but they're also one of the top reasons for cybersecurity incidents in Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. And you'll see the point of this as we move on to the next slide. And we get, now this is data when we consider, this is data from HHS again in the United States, and really about the breaches that we see. But now, to be fair, those of you who are going to linger on this for a second, you're going to say this looks kind of strange. It looks a little bit a little old, and it is a little old. To be fair, and remember the HIPAA Act, right? HIPAA was enacted in 1996, right? So this is old. We're looking at ways of conceiving of cybersecurity and network space as a bit different. So the legislation was also designed to improve portability and continuity of health insurance coverage, combat fraud, waste, and abuse. It wasn't conceived of as a cybersecurity measure per se. And so this is really challenging when we look at this data. It's good to have it. We don't want to take it away, but we look at it, and Billy and I were analyzing this and going back and forth and saying, well, if a point of compromise is email, or email network server, or how about network server? Look at the large, preponderance of what that space is and what that might mean. So it's a little opaque. And when we go to the next slide, you'll see how we've conceived this.
Yeah, it's a really good point, and we both look at it and we understand that some of this stuff, like Sean said, is opaque, and sometimes it's the data, maybe people aren't being necessarily honest, but I think in all there can be sometimes a lack of understanding, Sean, where the attacks are actually starting from, and that's fair, because the reality is this stuff is quite complex, and actually figuring out the entry point where something has started, where something has ended, and can actually be quite challenging. But when you look at some of the attacks, and when you look at some of the particular attacks that we're talking about today that involve taking advantage of weaknesses in the DNS, and taking advantage of the weaknesses that exist in cloud configurations. So tying it back to this, weaknesses in email and weaknesses in network servers, to use that term. But what we're really talking about there is both on-prem and cloud servers. So whether that's your good old-fashioned Exchange servers underneath the desk that I had in 2004 when I first deployed my first Exchange server, or whether it's the cloud services that we've got now. These are really, as far as we're concerned, and the scope of what we're talking about today, the compromise points and where the true location of the breaches are at the application layer, and that they're at the network layer. And this is because the entry point almost always, for as far as we're concerned, is taking advantage of the protocols that are at the application layer. They're taking advantage of DNS. We all know that Telnet and Secure Shell have had their issues in the past as well. HTTPS, whether you've got the correct type of encryption that's in place, or whether you're, and even if you do have that, is the certificate actually correctly configured, and is the certificate correctly deployed, and is it valid? DNS is a particular problem. It's an age-old protocol, like most of these protocols. It's old and it's weak, and it hasn't changed, since the standard was actually written. And there's, tons of research we can send you about this. But the reality is that many attacks occur because of misconfigurations and human error that actually happen at the DNS layer. Someone forgets to do something, someone makes a mistake. But then there's also the fact that there's very little programmatic support for changes. There's very little programmatic support that cleans up behind your engineers when they're actually doing something. So that's where DNS is a particular problem. And we'll talk more about the attack types in a moment. But what that does is, because, really the application, the role of DNS is to link up the application layer with the network layer. So it's telling the internet, yeah, brilliant, I want that web address to actually go to that IP address and the services that are sitting behind that IP address. This is, you're skipping through all this. You're literally going, yeah, we're going straight from layer 7 to layer 3 in the Aussie stack there. So it's complex, it's difficult to actually do. And it's as a result, it's low hanging fruit for the attackers. This is the typical type of early actions in the attack path that do happen. And this is hand on heart. These are the type of things that we do see every single day in the marketplace. When prospects come to us and prospects come and talk to us about this, they say, well, their domain name was taken over because the registration was lapsed, or access to a registrar was gained because MFA wasn't used. Spoofing of their domain name occurred because, like I mentioned, they aren't using SPF or DKIM correctly. So the internet doesn't know, if you're, when you're not using DMARC, the internet doesn't know that if SPF or DKIM aren't used, to reject the email. There we go. An email server's taken over because of a poisoned domain name in SPF records. There's a concept called domain takeover and subdomain takeover that happens because of that. Web services are taken over because, those cloud services that I was talking about, someone forgot to take the cloud service out of the DNS.
Back to the miscellaneous errors.
Cloud service over,
Right. Back to miscellaneous errors. Yeah.
So this is stuff that's coming about because, well, the cloud providers, in their efforts to bring us tons of derivative products, the marketplace is, stuffed with load balancers and cloud storage and compute instances and all these products. There's so many things there that actually need to be manually configured, and we need to manually clean up behind us. If you don't do it, it leads to those attacks. If you don't use the protocols correctly, if you don't use DMARC correctly, SPF and DKIM correctly, it will lead to these attacks. But there are defenses. Here's an example attack, Sean. Here's something that we see fairly frequently, and it ties into what we're talking about with pretexting. When we're going to show you some statistics in a moment, people think that, phishing is one of the leading causes of attack. Yeah, it is, but actually the action on the objective of a phishing email really is pretexting. It really is, how much information are they able to get through what you've been saying, through that social engineering aspect. They're able to get loads from people. That's the reality. It's still happening all the time. So this type of attack happens because there's a weakness within the DNS, within the layer of the OSI that I was talking about, within that protocol. A threat actor scans the DNS record. The threat actor then finds a vulnerability like an expired domain name registration. The actor then prepares to exploit that by buying that expired domain name and then inserting a malicious SPF record into the record. So they're tricking the internet into thinking, I can send email as that domain name. The poisoned SPF record populates through DNS, making the internet trust that email server. And this is all, at an early stage in the attack, the attacker has trust. It's convinced the internet that, yeah, I can send email. They then exploit that. They send the phishing email. They continue to send the phishing emails. The attacker repeats that and rinses it as people start to respond to emails. And that's just a constant until someone detects the attack. That's going to be constant, and that's going to be ongoing. In these situations, the attacker might not even need to install a botnet on the other side. They might not need to deploy anything on the other side.
Right.
This is on the internet side. It doesn't even have to get past the customer's firewall other than the email getting through to the end user, Sean.
Yeah, and that's so much of the conversation that Billy and I have been having when we've been doing our research on this is really looking at phishing as a killer app, right? That in and of itself, there are many different types, and I mentioned we'd start off by doing some of the description here. They fit under these categories, right? The broad category of phishing, but it's worth keeping attention on the various types that you see here and as they're described. So. If we go to the next slide, this may give us a little bit of a kick in the pants here, a little bit about what we know with regard to dealing with DKIM, SPF, and DMARC, and how those can address some of the phishing challenges. And the MITRE ATT&CK framework is really useful here. So, Billy, over to you.
Yeah, and as I mentioned earlier, DMARC is the protocol, the related protocols, SPF and DKIM, are there to protect you against phishing. Nobody can stop a bad actor sending emails as your domain, but you can tell the internet to reject emails if they're not coming from your email server or if you have not signed the domain through DKIM. Okay, so you've got those protocols there. And what DMARC does is it says, well, if SPF or if DKIM isn't being used, then to reject the email. And that's the ultimate goal, is that you want a DMARC policy at what is known as reject so that those emails are rejected. And this is why it's mentioned in the MITRE ATT&CK framework under phishing for information. Explicitly, organizations, in order to defend themselves against phishing and therefore pretexting, must use DMARC and SPF and DKIM. Okay, without using those protocols, emails will go from your domain into your customer, your supply chain, your patients, whoever you're working with. They will go into the inboxes unless you are using these protections. Okay, it's the number one way that you can stop impersonation attempts of your organization from your domain, which is why it's specifically mentioned in the attack
Called out here.
Okay.
So this is a great point. Unfortunately, but nonetheless useful for us. It's unfortunate because you can see that 80% in this study, which came from 2023, of cyber attacks against hospitals were identity based. So to Billy's point about spoofing and about being able to fool people into thinking that emails are legitimate, etc. This bit is not going away. This 2023 data hasn't changed very much in 2024. If we go to the next slide. So if we look back all the way back to 2021, CISA in the United States was concerned about DMARC and healthcare organizations, and they put out a fine report, right, that looked at why spear phishing and phishing are the top attack vectors for healthcare organizations, that leading to impacts against the electronic patient health information, which, as you know, is some of the most valuable information that is out there that for sale on the dark web and other spaces. So they've been advocating for this all the way back to 2021, and you can see here on the bottom right-hand side of the screen as well, just a conversation about the fraudulent emails that are easy to design and cheap to deliver. That's space that we know is accelerating as well, that the adoption of even last year's generative AI technologies will make this much easier and much more addressable for the cybersecurity rational actors who are the cyber criminals here in this space. We're going to take advantage of all the tools that they have. So fast forward to the next slide, and we look at January 2025, another alert comes out and says that we really should be looking at how do we combat business email compromise in organizations. And as Billy mentioned, DMARC is simply one of the best ways to be able to handle business email compromise. And we know that in some great detail at RedSift, but it's something that you should be paying attention to broadly. Again, recommend that you read this. Billy, did you have any comments on this before we get into the meat of the data that we?
No, I think probably one thing you mentioned there is that the low barrier of entry for actors means that email is low hanging fruit. It is and actually the way that bad actors are trying to find organizations to attack and that are vulnerable and aren't using DMARC is also low hanging fruit. Your internet facing assets, so the domains and the subdomains, importantly, that you all use within your organizations, are easy to discover for bad actors. They're easy to find. They use passive DNS tooling in order to find them and then check the configurations that are being used. So just that easiness again, Sean, just to highlight, it's not just because it's easy to send an email. It's easy to find all these assets. Anyone with who understands the domain name system a bit is able to actually go and find everything. You may think, this is all protected, and it's not easy for people to find the DNS zones, i.e. the host names that you're using to send emails. It is very easy for people to do that. There is no barrier to entry for these type of attacks anymore.
Right, and we just have to remind ourselves too that cybersecurity, particularly cybercrime, the actors there are are rational. They're going to use their resources and their time and in a way that give them the maximum advantage. And we know, just as you described, Billy, the tools that are available to them give them access to a very reasonable approach to discovering where the weaknesses are. So what we've done here in the next few slides is really look at some of the DMARC adoption in various instances. And the picture that we're going to paint for you, I think, is uneven adoption of DMARC across the board. But let me give you a little preamble again. So as Billy mentioned, many of these protocols have been around for a while. So DMARC has been around for the better over 20 years now. And when we look at it and say that there's uneven adoption in the healthcare sectors, that again indicates where we are in the level of maturity for the sector broadly. And I think that's worth reinforcing here. So this particular slide, when we look at it's the HHS data. So for breaches that affected more than 200,000 people, and it's the entities that are behind those that report the breaches. And when we looked at those entities, we could see here this picture that is right in front of you that shows, again, roughly, right, the preponderance of them are not protected in the way that they should be, right, when it comes to DMARC. And that is a rather unfortunate picture, but it is the reality. If we move to the next slide, when we look at European healthcare, and Billy, I'm going to pass this over to you because this is data that you looked at in particular. Do you have
Yeah, absolutely, and it's a kind of similar story. What we published a bit of research yesterday as well, Sean, which looked at the kind of broader picture. It's available on our blog, and
yeah.
The broader picture for all organisations outside of healthcare is that DMARC adoption is increasing, but it's still really, really slow. Based on our tracking and our monitoring of almost 73 million apex domains, so the parent domains, i.e. redshift.com, for example, that's sending email, adoption is up 2.3 million, so it is increasing compared to
last year,
12 months ago, the last assessment that we actually did. And we're seeing these general trends in these sectors as well. But the reality is that even, for example, in Europe, and I think arguably sections of Europe could probably less the UK, but certainly on the continent, they've always been early adopters of protocols. They're big fans of DNSSEC, for example, and have really pushed that agenda. And they also did jump on DMARC. But European organisations, and this is organisations who have significant amounts of most of their revenue in either Europe or in the United Kingdom, you're still seeing this real mixed bag of adoption. Worryingly, however, 27.7% have no DMARC policy at all, and 32.7% have a policy of none. They are not at compliance. They have not started their journey, and they're not using DMARC properly. The picture of people that reject, brilliant, great on those 24% of organisations who are using it effectively. But this is, the adoption is still slow and is still really mixed. It ties into what you were saying as well, Sean.
Yeah. And so, as we move through the next couple of sectors, so when we looked at this, we said we're going to pick sector after sector within the broader healthcare ecosystem. And we look at medical devices here, the largest companies by revenue, 100 of them in this instance. And again, it's a mixed bag. So, we shouldn't be seeing this as far as I'm concerned. And I think Billy and I are in full agreement at this. Here we are, 2025. We shouldn't be, at a mixed bag position here. These DMARC's been around, but we give you this, because there is wider adoption. There is a path forward. Pharmaceutical companies, perhaps, a bit better. Right, so this is interesting as well. Top 100 companies by revenue. We see a better picture, and then if we go to the next slide, we'll see again top healthcare tech companies. Tech companies have better adoption broadly, which is interesting. Maybe that's because of awareness. So we have some hypotheses on these, but it could be broader awareness in the healthcare tech community but there isn't regulatory that is requiring them to deal with DMARC in particular. If we go to the next slide,
One point on the pharma companies actually talking about that this is quite an interesting point, the 50% higher, and I do wonder if that is just was driven very much by the consumer nature of the pharma companies, because of, we all know that, you know, when email became common in the 90s, that late 80s into early 90s, and as end users, it wasn't just professionals that were using it. As we all started to use emails, the amount of pharmaceutical spam that used to come out, I think a lot of that has been driven still by that fear around that. So just one comment on that, talking about
communicating directly with consumers. Great point.
Right.
So
which ties into the insurer point here as well, yeah.
Yeah, this is a smaller sample size, but larger healthcare insurers. So you get an idea here when you look at this. Now the insurance space is more mature space, perhaps. You could say once again that they've been thinking about these issues for a longer period of time, as broadly the financial sector space has been thinking about these issues with regard to cyber. So we get a little bit of a better picture, smaller sample size, but nonetheless, broad, uneven strokes when it comes to adoption of DMARC, even if it's increasing, and that's the good news story. If we go to the next,
I think in financial services and insurance as well, compliance and regulatory reform had a big impact early days.
Very early on.
They were switched on, before HIPAA even. They were early adopters of DMARC because the market dictated that they had to be. And ironically, if they didn't use it, their insurance would go up. So, it swings and roundabouts.
Fair enough. Exactly. So we're going to talk very briefly about some of the regulatory environments and some of the changes that we see here. So as I mentioned early on, HIPAA goes all the way back to the 90s. So this is a last century activity that we're now seeing with under some revision. So there's been a lot of pressure to move HIPAA into the cybersecurity space more broadly. And so this new rule that is in the proposal, right, which is the security rule to strengthen the cybersecurity of electronic protected health information, is important for a variety of reasons. So while it doesn't spell out email security in particular, it does spell out the alignment with HHS cybersecurity performance goals, and those are listed here on the slide itself. So when you look at common email phishing threats, the spoofing, phishing, and fraud, that's all there in the HHS performance goals that should be combated against. Requiring and reviewing a technology asset inventory and a network map, good common practice without which you can't do very well at all to deal with enterprise risk. And then the identification of all reasonably anticipated threats. This is important for confidentiality, integrity, and availability of EPHI. So that's all very reasonable and a long time in coming, because again, HIPAA didn't start off with this in mind. It didn't start off thinking about cybersecurity. Now here we are, 2025. We're finally at that stage. And I'm going to lean in and say I'm reasonably positive this will move forward. In the not too distant future. We've got a little bit of time yet, but Trump administration 1 was working on this. Biden administration was, and here we are at a different point, thinking through where we want HIPAA to be. So if we move to anything on this, go ahead.
I really like this change, because we forget requiring and reviewing a technology asset inventory and network map, and that's the important part of it. Too much of the early guidance and legislation across any legislation, either in Europe or in the US in particular, was thinking about assets as the physical assets still.
Right.
This state still. The fact that it is requiring, the asset inventory, and it highlights the network map, I want that to start to focus people on the fact that includes your digital assets, that includes your domain names, that includes your subdomains, it includes those things that are hosting web services and are hosting email services, it includes certificates, it includes your IP addresses. Just because you can't see it in front of you, it doesn't mean it's not an asset. And I think the reference there, think about it in that way. Do you know every subdomain that you have that's sending email? But importantly as well, think about your asset inventory like, who is legitimately trying to send email? What sending services? What are your marketing team doing? What are your finance team doing? What are your HR team doing? What are your engineering teams doing? Those are all assets, those sending services. So you should have those documented as well.
Right, and we'll see that again as we look at some of the other protocols and requirements. So SERSA is another, and I mention it here only because there's a great deal of focus in SERSA, again, a proposed rule on the on ransomware and on reporting on ransomware, and that will have positive knock-on effects for email security broadly. We started off by talking about the entry points for so many of the cyber attacks that are in this space, and so SERSA, should it move forward, it's not yet been finalized, we'll look at these particular pieces. So mandatory reporting of cyber incidents for critical infrastructure, healthcare as a critical infrastructure, increased accountability and governance, ransomware payment reporting will be very valuable should that, and then potential for future regulatory actions may be there, but at the minimum, right now it's really about reporting, and that transparency and visibility into what's happening in this space will be hugely valuable globally, not just in the United States. So we go to
We
the
decided
next.
not to touch on the UK part of critical infrastructure, but it's important to note, naturally healthcare comes under critical infrastructure in the UK as well. They should be following the CAF framework, the cyber assessment framework that's published. We don't quite know what changes are going to be made by the new government in the UK yet, which is why we've not really focused on it. They have indicated an appetite to improve it, particularly given there has been a spate of incidents, particularly within the National Health Service, but we don't really know how that's going to
How it's going to
evolve
move
yet
forward.
in anything yet.
Yeah, I think we'll do another one of these in the not too distant future, and maybe we'll have some better picture on that, Billy.
Yeah.
Right? So NIS2, NIS2 in Europe, clearly, right? There's a great deal there to discuss, and we can't get into it and give it the time that it deserves in this short presentation. But cybersecurity standards across all healthcare organizations. This is a focus. Again, critical infrastructure is a main portion of this act, and so when we look at NIS2 requiring entities in the healthcare sector to adopt risk management practices and take standard appropriate measures to manage risks that are posed to the security of the network and information systems, for example, you could say, as the slide does, and as we've noted, that arguably, right, robust email security is just one such appropriate measure. We can move to the next slide as we go through these fairly rapidly. So for those of you who know, great. If you don't, you should pay attention to this because just this past month, the EU also signaled that it's intensifying its efforts in this space when it comes to the healthcare sector. They listed in a very fine document that is listed actually in our references several different points. Strengthening prevention and preparedness. Again, we'll see quite a bit there when it comes to email security, and then the regulatory strategic framework will continue to increase and develop in ways that are valuable for the healthcare sector. So it's moving and changing space, but nonetheless, we'll pay attention to it in greater detail when we get to the next of these presentations in the future. Now, industry side, a very interesting point, and back to you, Billy, on this.
So, organisations working in the healthcare sector, if they're consumer facing, will be processing credit card payments. They're likely to be processing payment information, and they're likely to be doing that in high volume. So if you've not already paid attention to this, it's important that you pay that. You understand that from the end of March 2025, PCI DSS 4.0, and it's actually 4.0.1 now, will enforce two new sets of requirements in particular that we are familiar with and we talk about. So the first one is they recommend that it's essential, effectively, it's mandated that you have got adequate phishing protection for your environment, okay? And the guidance I have to be clear, they do not say you must have DMARC, SPF, and DKIM, but in the guidance, they do recommend SPF, DMARC, and DKIM. Okay, so, they're not they're not recommending it, but they are recommending it.
As best practice, right?
Yeah,
as best
as
practice.
best practice. That's the safer way to use. If you are subject, if you're a level 1 processor, and if you are subject to the full scope of PCI DSS, then you have to ensure that you've got those relevant protections in place against phishing, of which DMARC is best practice. The second area, which is a little bit less commonly known when we've been talking to the sector about this, is that there's some new requirements regarding inventory. Now, I touched on as part of the Aussie stack and spoke about the different layers, and I spoke about TLS briefly. Now, certificates are used as part of encrypting data on the internet, ensuring that TLS is used correctly. So the council have realised, these are really important, and actually you should be managing your certificates in a much better way. So they are now mandating that you must have an inventory of all certificates that are used for payment to protect and encrypt payment information. But that those, and this sounds really obvious, but it's actually not that obvious, that all of those certificates must be valid and correctly configured, i.e. they must not be expired and they must not have misconfigurations, okay? Now, I'm not going to talk about certificates because I could talk about it for hours and hours and bore everyone to tears because it's my favorite subject. Take a look at redshift.com. We have a free certificate tool called Certificates Lite to get you started there, to start building that inventory, because Gartner, our friends at Gartner, tell us constantly certificate monitoring and management is still a huge issue for organizations. So it's important to pay attention to these new requirements and what you can do to adopt them.
Back to knowing your assets and your digital estate. So in the time remaining, we're going to teach you a little bit about means to reduce phishing, and this is back to Billy, and I'll have some points on it. So Billy, over to you, and then we'll continue.
Yeah, I mentioned at the beginning, I gave that brief, introduction to DMARC, and it really is the number one way to defend your organization against phishing attacks. Okay, by correctly implementing DMARC, SPF, and DKIM, you will ensure that emails that are, people that are trying to impersonate your brand and your domain, your leadership, your staff, okay, that are being sent to your customers, that are being sent to your supply chain, whoever it actually is, they will not reach the inbox if you use DMARC, okay? The Redshift on DMARC product, okay, is the leading solution to automate the process, to give you a short, efficient path to that process, to those steps. The ultimate goal is that reject state. It helps you protect against those service takeovers. Additionally, there's some other protocols and tools that we don't have time to go into greatly today, but are included, including additional protection from a protocol known as MTA-STS. And also a brilliant tool called BIMI. BIMI is a protocol, is a way that you can build trust with people who are receiving your emails, because it will allow you to display your brand's name in the inbox of the people that you're sending, your brand logo, in the inbox of people that you're sending emails to. So they will immediately have trust and have confidence that the email is coming from you, and it improves open rates. It really does. So if you're working in marketing for a healthcare organization, if your marketing team are complaining to you and saying these emails aren't being opened, BIMI, absolutely, and it's all
BIMI's your friend
within our platform.
Yeah.
It's something that we don't talk about a great deal. If you implement these protocols correctly, and if you work in a security organization within your company and you're on this call, you get so much security telemetry from DMARC, okay? You know who's phishing you, who's trying to phish you. You know the IP addresses that they're coming from, and you know the domain names, okay, that they're using. You know when those are actually, those phishing attempts are actually happening. But importantly as well, you'll know with those marketing teams or finance teams or payroll teams or whoever it is
What they're
are
experiencing.
wanting to send legitimate email, okay, and whether it's correctly configured or not. Okay, so the amount of intelligence and insight that you can actually get from these reports that come through the DMARC protocol is a brilliant source of asset inventory, as I spoke about, but also threat intelligence for your SOC. And our customers take this data and they do build it into their SIEM and they build it into their orchestration in order to make sure that it's used.
Yeah, that's brilliant, and it's something that we don't talk enough about. So, on that note, let's just leave off before we get to the Q&A by saying you can check your DMARC records, and our good colleague Emma has also mentioned it by looking at our Redshift Investigate tool. So take a look at it, look at our DMARC records and other essential protocols, get a feeling for where this is, because I think we can rapidly mature this space. There's a good news story, right? That DMARC adoption is increasing, but an uneven story, and we'll continue this as we go forward, as we analyze the healthcare sector, and then the financial services sector is next, and give us an indication of where things are in those spaces. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to any Q&A. Billy, it's always a pleasure to be able to talk with you and to be able to share what we know about this space and how we can mature it and improve cybersecurity for all. So we've got
always fun.
Yeah, always fun.
I definitely don't want to do that fishing trip, though. It just doesn't appeal to me. It's not.
It doesn't. Yeah, exactly. Well, sorry, Billy. We'll we won't do it. But we got a question in the chat. So configuring DMARC is one aspect, but verifying DMARC for incoming emails is also important. Yeah, absolutely. Billy, any comment on that?
Yeah, couldn't agree more. You need to ensure that your supply chain, you need to ensure that your vendors, your marketplace, anyone that's working with you is actually using the protocol correctly as well. Okay, so you want to make sure that anyone that you're actually working with is correctly using the available standards and what they should be using. I couldn't agree more.
And imagine the space if everyone were using it. Right. Imagine the decrease in cybercrime that we'd be seeing across the board.
Yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant.
We got some other questions actually here. There's in the Q&A section.
Yep. A couple more coming in.
I think one for you, Sean. How do current regulations like HIPAA address email security? And are you expecting any future updates that will kind of tighten email security a bit more?
Yeah. I mean, as we went into, thanks for that, Billy. First of all, they don't, right? HIPAA doesn't, right? It wasn't intended to do that. And so when we see, and I'm very hopeful that the proposed rule with HIPAA will be will become a final rule in the not too distant future, and we'll see an indication for improved email security, even if it's not mentioned directly in that. We don't need to see the estimation by the people who are working on it was that they didn't want to create a whole new section on email security. Aligning with the goals of CISA and with HHS would be sufficient to be able to achieve the goals that they had in mind for email security. So I think the upshot of it is not built to do it initially. We're now at a different stage in 2025. I think the indicator is that we'll be moving in that direction very strongly, and that's positive. So we should be able to maybe, Billy, if you and I are doing this presentation, I hope we do a year from now, we'll probably see some pretty significant declines in certain types of cyber attacks, and that will be heartening for those of us who've been working in cybersecurity for a very long time and seeing the difficulties that we've had to date. So we've got one more question coming in, I think. Dinos is typing, and it looks like a longer question. Billy, and there's a couple others. Let's see here.
There's one there actually, Sean. How can healthcare organisations improve their training programs to ensure that staff are aware that's what's going on as well? And that's a kind of, I think we'll both have viewpoints on that. You can do all the training that you want with your staff, in the world, but you have to protect them by making sure that the protocols are used in the first place. So the best way of improving your your training programs is by making sure that they don't have to use their training. You
That's
want
right.
to make sure that that you are putting the correct defences in place in the first place. And we, like I mentioned earlier, it's low hanging fruit for the bad guys to find organisations that aren't using the protocols. Okay, so if you're not, then you're not meeting your obligation to your customers and to your supply chain and to your teams. Okay, you're not meeting those obligations.
Yeah, fully agree with you, Billy. And you and I have had conversations about the securing the weakest link and the ideas behind that, and the challenges that come with really having to depend on people, right, to not make errors when they're in high pressure environments themselves. And a lot of the training to date, to be frank, I think, from my estimation, has been mostly about check the box. But I think that's changed, right? I think that's changing. I should say that there's improvements in understanding of what sort of training is necessary for different sorts, not just sort of the same blanket effort to just get everybody to look for errors in email that might indicate that that's a spoofed email, or that there's something there that may be malware. That sort of training, I think, has moved on pretty considerably, and there's also good evidence. There's some good economic evidence that training has improved, right? But at the same time, like you say, I would rather that we didn't have to wait and depend on people, right, to be the final the final the final check on anything that might be a cyber attack, right? It would be better if the environment were such that they didn't have to worry about that, and I think that's buildable. I think we should have great confidence that we can do it, and zero trust is often used, but well before you get to zero trust, there are all sorts of protocols, right? And DMARC is just one of them that will give you the security that you need and help you bake it in early. So we had a question from Dinos on the side here. So what would your advice be to physicians, nurses, radiographers, medical admins, and all those who work in a hospital or are not necessarily IT specialists to improve healthcare security? Excellent presentation. Billy, over to you on that one, unless you want me to take a first swipe while you think through something even more clever than I might have to say on it.
It'll never be more clever, but this is a really good question. But pondering it, I think if you're an end user, within the organisation, I think about what are you expecting to see on a day-to-day basis. Okay, so if you're working as a clinician within a healthcare setting, what emails are you expecting to receive? What phone calls are you expecting to receive? What devices are you expecting to use? Okay, it's good security. A big part of it is predictability. So I think most of us now are at a stage with our maturity with these things that, like what happened, by the way, about 20 minutes ago when I'm trying to do this presentation, I got a call from an unknown number. I would never answer a call from an unknown number on my personal cell phone. It's likely to be, something a little bit malicious. And the same thing, if you see a device that's not recognised, if you see a device in a hospital setting, for example, that's not asset tagged, follow your organisation's device policy. Should you be using personal devices, or should you only be using asset devices that the organisation uses? So I think, you think about if there's anything unexpected, Sean, treat it with absolute skepticism. So.
Yeah, this is it does boil down to see something, say something, and being in an environment that is not punitive is going to be very important too when you see that thing, and being able to go to, the other thing that I very often think about here is that, you should know who your champions are in the organization to talk about potential cybersecurity problems. So you're a physician, you're an admin, it doesn't matter who you are in that organization, you should be able to talk to somebody there who is going to take you seriously, right? And if that were achievable, that's sort of a cultural question that would also move the needle pretty far in the direction of creating security. So I think we're in good shape here with regard to what we've seen. And Billy, it's been just a lot of fun talking with you about what we know. And we're going to do this roadshow. We're going to look at this again, maybe quarterly. That would be the ideal. So we see where we see improvement and where we see uneven adoption, and where we are in the future is the future. So there you go.
Thank you, Sean.
Thanks.
Thank you,
Thanks,
everyone.
Billy.
Great
Thanks
to see
all.
you.
Thanks for paying attention and being with us today. Thanks so much, all.